So I will be presenting on multidisciplinary and comparative homeland security. So this is more an academic but still grounded overview to provide you with a little bit of context for what you will then be addressing and working on during the rest of the course, okay? If we look at multidisciplinarity in homeland security, we can basically do so based on two different understandings. One would be the academic understanding of multidisciplinarity, so really different academic disciplines and kinds of sciences working together in addressing a topic and trying to solve problems. But we also can talk about the homeland security discipline in terms of different professional disciplines and different communities of practice involved. So we can talk about homeland security as a law enforcement enterprise. We can talk about it as a more counter-terrorist enterprise. We can talk about it as it relates to emergency management. And this, as you can see, involves a whole array of different practical disciplines, right? So when we look at homeland security from a multidisciplinary perspective, obviously what comes to mind first is the setup of the Department of Homeland Security itself, which, as we all know, consists in several different components. And there are different kinds of listings of what those components are. So the latest, and they are not always perfectly matching, so there's some interpretation involved, but this is the listing as per the DHS website and the page on DHS components. So this is the current interpretation of DHS of which components it comprises. So this is a safe point, at least to start with, and you can look at it. But then if you want to describe the complete operational picture of Homeland Security, the question is, does the DHS component structure give you that complete operational picture? And the answer obviously is no, it doesn't. Because Homeland Security, as defined by the department, reaches beyond the department and its components and agencies, right? So we have had two quadrennial Homeland Security reviews, or QHSR, so far, because they are legally mandated and the department needs to come up with them. And as the name says, it's quadrennial, so every 4 years they need to come up with a review. So far, they have come up with two reviews, the first of 2010 and the second of 2014. While we will look at the second, current, if you will, QHSR in a second, let's take a moment to look back at QHSR 2010, where an important concept was coined, and this is the Homeland Security enterprise, defined as an enterprise with a shared responsibility of federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, non-governmental and private sector partners, as well as individuals, families, and communities. Diverse and widely distributed, spanning the country and including international partners, the Homeland Security enterprise jointly builds capabilities and carries out Homeland Security functions. So the Homeland Security enterprise is a concept that we use if we want to look at what functions are there in the Homeland Security mission space to accomplish, right? And then which different entities need to work together. And those entities reach beyond borders because they involve and include international partners. However, this is just a starting point. This doesn't give us a description of the mission space, it doesn't list those functions, and it also doesn't give us a legal definition of Homeland Security. And as the Congressional Research Service has pointed out, there, at any rate, is no statutory definition of Homeland Security that reflects the breadth of the enterprise as currently understood. But It has been maintained by CRS, the Congressional Research Service, as well, that the definition must go beyond the DHS sector. And here you can see some study-wise recommendations of what such a definition should include. It's up to you to decide whether that makes sense or not. It's just an example from a policy study for the Congress. Then if we think of the definition of the Homeland Security enterprise involving a lot of components, a lot of parts working together in executing functions and missions. So what are those functions and missions? So if we look at this, then QHSR 2014 comes to mind and becomes relevant. Already QHSR 2010 defined the Homeland Security Enterprise's 5 enduring core missions. In QHSR 2014, we iterated, restated, reconfirmed those. And those are the 5 enduring core missions. Preventing terrorism and enhancing security still being the fundamental mission, but then other missions being added. And also, in addition to those 5 enduring core missions, it's also regarded as a Homeland Security mission to mature and strengthen the Homeland Security enterprise itself. So that's important to bear in mind. And it doesn't stop at those 5 enduring core missions, because based on the National Preparedness Goal and Presidential Policy Directive 8 on national preparedness, Homeland Security is a risk-informed enterprise focusing not on everything. So an all-hazards approach doesn't mean one focuses on all hazards, but one focuses on hazards across the board, but on those that pose the greatest risks. So what are the greatest risks? It helps us to determine that if we have a strategically prioritized ranking, and QHSR 2014 is a document that provides us with, in addition to the 5 enduring core missions, with 5 strategic priorities for Homeland Security, starting with safeguarding and securing cyberspace, and then reaching all the way down to strengthening the execution of our mission through public-private partnerships. And then to make things, if you will, more complex or still more multidisciplinary, QHSR 2014 already defined 3 areas of ongoing priority and emphasis driven by long-standing policy imperatives. And here you have aspects like nuclear terrorism based on improvised devices, immigration, and national preparedness, and the whole community approach. All this, the 5 enduring core missions, the 5 strategic priorities, and the 3 areas of ongoing priority and emphasis are supposed to contribute to realizing the Homeland Security vision as stated in QHSR 2014, and this is a homeland that is safe, secure, and resilient against terrorism and other hazards, where American interests, aspirations, and way of life can thrive. So this already gives us some cornerstones and pieces with which we can work if we want to construct a definition of what Homeland Security is. However, there is still more to consider, and QHSR 2014 gives us more components to consider, or more aspects, more ingredients to look at when we seek an answer to the question of what Homeland Security is. For example, QHSR 2014 comes up with the term of Homeland Security community in addition of the term of a Homeland Security enterprise from the previous QHSR. So Homeland Security requires a network community, QHSR 2014 says. And it says that the Homeland Security community also includes stakeholders and borders. It needs to be flexible, adaptable, and efficient in addressing diverse challenges. It can be more efficient if it acts as an integrated, mutually supporting network and based on a shared effort. So that's of course, important political or policy terminology, but it is meaningful, as we will see in a second. Again, compare this to this definition of Homeland Security as a network community to the definition of the Homeland Security enterprise that was included in the first QHSR, and that was very focused on capabilities and functions. And now the QHSR 2014 tries to expand that to a, if you will, network-centric view. Academically, of course, there also has been an ongoing discussion of what Homeland Security is, and different colleagues have proposed different concepts. One I like is here this bubble or lenses model, depending on how you look at it, by Kiltz and Ramsey, who are saying what Homeland Security is depends on, in fact, how you look at it, and different people and different professional communities have different perceptions of what relevant frames of Homeland Security are. So and this is something you may apply to yourself, right? And maybe we can discuss that during the rest of the course already to some extent. Some of you also may look at Homeland Security as a criminal justice problem, right? Those whom we have in class here from peer admin programs may look at Homeland Security as an organizational design and policy implementation problem, right? I, with my background, tend to look at Homeland Security as something that is cross-cutting, that addresses global threats and hazards as they then, in a specific geographical setting, materialize into risks that can be addressed. So my inclination probably would be to use what is called Lens 2 here, Homeland Security as an international relations problem, and then how it trickles down to in fact pose the citizens of countries such as the United States at risk, and then how US policies and strategies and the government tries to respond to that. Probably the solution in like how to work with those lenses is to end up looking at Homeland Security as a collaborative nexus problem, how to really bring those parts together and make sure that we all collaborate in addressing the challenges posed by the Homeland Security mission space. So on the one hand, you can say that's a quite academic view. On the other, it helps us sort out, for example, it helps us sort out where perceptions collide and not overlap, and where that may prevent collaboration, and what we may do in order to increase that perception of Homeland Security as a collaborative nexus problem, so that the mindset of all involved becomes more comprehensive and inclusive, and we can establish a better interoperability of minds. So I believe this is a model that can be practically useful. This is another model, a little older, but still very meaningful, that helps you sort out where Homeland Security includes fighting terrorism, but to what extent it includes use of military means, use of the military in international theaters, and then also the defense support of civil authorities and aspects of homeland defense. So this is an interesting model that starts at a high level of like comprehensive society security and then tries to break it down. Also very useful to apply when you want to see where the stumbling blocks are and how collaboration across the Homeland Security enterprise may be increased. This is an expansion on the model that basically in a different style of visualization tries to work out where Homeland Security lies in the middle between more military and strategic, global focused approaches and more societal comprehensive approaches. Something to look at and maybe read through and you have the references here. What is homeland security? When we look at it academically, it's interesting because we have different descriptive modes that we can apply. So, for example, we try to provide security, right, to the citizens. So this is like would be a verbal descriptive mode of what homeland security is, and just describes an activity, what somebody does. So increasing or using fusion centers, we try to bring together information from different agencies and condense it so to be able to increase our level of preparedness. This is a very simple way to describe what homeland security is, and according to a concept coming originally from psychology by Karen Kingsbury, this is pretty simple. If we then go through that and look at the substantive, so homeland security, this is a more, so if we don't use a verb to describe what we are doing, but if we use a noun, so we are here to realize the homeland security vision, this becomes more complicated. So what is security? What is the homeland? How do the two interconnect? And then using homeland security in terms of a substantive as a noun gives it a more like ontological meaning. We discuss what security is, what the value is, how to weigh security against other values such as freedom and liberty, what that means to this nation and things. So it becomes more substantial, but it also becomes more complicated. So the different descriptive modes are interesting, and this is something that we may be addressing and discussing during the course when it comes to academic perspectives. Then also levels of definition. There are different conceptual levels that we have available when talking about homeland security and how to define it. We can try to come up with a real or realistic definition of homeland security. This would be to really grasp what homeland security means in practice, what it is, its essence, its reality. But we can also come up with a definition and see, okay, there are laws, there is legislation that establishes a Department of Homeland Security, there is the Patriot Act, and then we can see like what's mandated by law to the government and also to citizens and to the private sector to do, and then we say this, like the result of this, the lowest common denominator of that, if the law is followed, right, of those rules, this then is homeland security. We also can describe homeland security as an ideal type and then see what it looks like around the world, how it like is addressed by different states within the US, and then just really see how different instances of homeland security or different concepts that are used deviate from that ideal type, right? You have heard of Max Weber and the famous sociologist, and this is the ideal type based thinking. This is what he introduced, and he used it throughout the social realm to see, to be able to compare differences and also figure out why things differ from another and why they work or don't work. You can also look at it normatively. From an academic point of view, you tend to like select a definition and then normatively discuss what homeland security should be, and then you can apply critical thinking, right, because that's your frame of reference. So what is homeland security? You can come up with a normative vision. This program, the IMPS HLS program, has a normative vision of what homeland security should be, right? It's what leaders in homeland security should know and do, so to make it comprehensive, to really appreciate all hazards. So this involves a normative vision that the program has of what ideal type homeland security should look like. And you can criticize that as well. Hermeneutic definition of homeland security, this is more the historical development of homeland security, how it predates 9/11, how it has changed since 9/11 and why. And then an operational definition of homeland security. This is basically something that we have already addressed. This is the definition of the Homeland Security enterprise, for example, is an example of an operational definition, because it says the Homeland Security enterprise are all those who work together to create capabilities to exercise Homeland Security functions. So what is being done, right? So Homeland Security defined just not as an end state, as an objective, as a vision, but just as an operation, in terms of what those who believe they serve it are doing. In the philosophy of science, at least in undergraduate terminology, if you will, there is a nice term called the quizzing of the potato, because what a potato is and how you define a potato depends on how you look at it. So, for example, if you look at a potato and see like how much money you would get if you sold it, you get probably like so you define a potato in economics terms, right? So the market value of the potato. If you just like take it in your hand and let it fall, and then hopefully it like plummets on the floor, then that's a physics-based answer, right? So that's the physics definition of the potato. If you look at it like what happens if you steal somebody's potato, then that's a legal answer. So that's different kinds of definition. It's really undergraduate level, but it helps you understand that Homeland Security, in terms of look at the perceptual frameworks, right? It is not there as such. It depends on how you look at it. So you can quiz Homeland Security from different points of view. And this also enables your critical thinking, because then another person may quiz it from another point of view, and here you have the argument, right, to work out and to solve. It is important to start with some analytical foundations to talk about, and that's your choice. You're the experts, or you're the students. You're part of the professional and academic community, so you choose your point of departure. What I always like to use is this classic piece by Arnold Wolfers, not only because he also was Austrian, right, but because he came up in as early as in 1952 with a criticism of the concept of security and how it was applied in the US to the security of this nation, and said it's too ambiguous and it's a symbol. You really can't determine how do you know it when you see it and things, it's too fuzzy. So, but what we can understand is, or what we can assume, that it has to do something with values, and with the conviction that those values that a society has acquired, a society should also act together to defend. And I believe today that is still very important. And if you look at the Homeland Security vision that we cited earlier in this presentation, then you can see that the Arnold Wolfers definition of security is still something that obviously has informed the definition of the Homeland Security vision, because it is about values, it is about maintaining the American way of life and things, right? You remember. So this is important. So this is an interesting analytical concept to use. And today, I have briefly addressed that. There is an important U component if you use a value-based definition of Homeland Security, because the implementation of security in terms of safeguarding commonly acquired values should itself be guided by those values. That means realizing Homeland Security should not counter realizing values of liberty, freedom of speech, whatever, right? The amendment rights and also more global considerations as they relate to human security. That's a challenge. In the Cold War, it was pretty obvious, because we were the good ones, we had our values and we uphold them, and by no means could we violate our own values by upholding our values, because the threat was so evident and there was mutually assured destruction and things like that. Today, it's different and it's more global. It's also more a matter of perception, right? What the biggest threat is and where the risks are. People see that differently. There are different values on which you can base risk assessment, so it becomes more complicated. maintaining homeland security without compromising other values becomes a challenge, not in the US only, but everywhere. The European Union is also very carefully looking at this. So this is important, and this marks a difference to what Arnold Wolfers classically was thinking and saying about security as a value. Probably you are aware there are different paradigms then in which you can frame the study of homeland security. All hazards approach is something that is obvious. Resilience is important. These are sometimes more buzzwords than paradigms, but still they make a difference and they help frame discussion and also policies and programs. Security continua become more and more important. Look at the external, internal security continuum. For example, as it also applies to the use of homeland security, to the use of technology for security. Drones or unmanned aerial systems are used in the global war on terror, but also domestically. And so this technology cuts across borders, as does the internet, and as do risks as they relate to cybercrime and things. I mean, that is all obvious, but what we have to realize is we really are talking about security continua, because we can't say this is inside as to this is like external, this is military, this is law enforcement, this is state, this is federal, this is private, this is public. It all interacts in terms of problems, but also in terms of solutions. This is important to remember. We have tried to come up with a comprehensive perspective on those different aspects and how to address them in our new textbook on cross-disciplinary perspectives on homeland and civil security, where we are not only addressing the cross-disciplinary point of view, but also look at homeland security from different national points of view and across different countries. So this is something, we hope that this book may be a resource, may become a resource for both practitioners and scholars to better understand what the homeland security community is, what it is challenged with, and how research and studies can support it in better meeting the preparedness-based objectives and the value-based vision of homeland security. A analytical concept, or I should say a paradigm rather, that this book is based on is new security studies, which is a train of thought that argues that we currently see the emergence of new security concepts, new security subjects, new security objects, and new security practices. This is something for you to think over in a more quiet moment, but just to pick an example, look at new security concepts. So this relates to how and why and when are issues framed as security issues as opposed to other issues. For example, in the 90s, or up to the mid-90s, nobody spoke about water as a resource, as a security issue. It was regarded as a, environmental, humanitarian issue. But starting in the mid-90s, scholars increasingly looked at water as a resource and as a cause of conflict, right? So we can say that water became securitized. It became looked at in the first place, or to an important extent, as a security issue. If you look at today and, for example, unaccompanied minors crossing the border, right, that could be framed as a humanitarian issue, as a whatever issue, but it is currently framed as a homeland security issue, and therefore there is a legal response to it, right, and it has been formalized, so it has been defined in legal terms, there is deferred action that can be applied to and things, and then due process is applied. So it is looked at, it's been securitized not in terms as a threat to the existence of the nation, but still as something that clearly now falls predominantly, or has been predominantly framed as falling within the homeland security mission space. just as an example. So this is something that new security studies look at more closely and across the world. This is why this field is I find this field so exciting, and I believe it can provide interesting scholastic perspectives on how to look at homeland security, not just as an academic enterprise, like for its own sake, but also with a view to reaching practically relevant recommendations. Then, to conclude, international and comparative homeland security. So why is the international perspective on homeland security important? Even if we should assume that homeland security is specific to the US and does exist nowhere else or has no equivalence elsewhere, it already would be international, because homeland security implies, as you can read on this poster, working across the country and around the world to keep the nation safe and secure. Right? So to work with international partners, including deployment of workforce. If you think of TSA pre-clearance centers in a couple of foreign countries and other things. So already, if we say homeland security is American, it is already international. Also because the threats like cyber and things know no borders. I mean, that's fairly obvious. But again, the slogan, working across the country and around the world to keep our nation safe and secure, really gives you an impression of how the department sees its mission and the international dimension to it. If we look at it closer, we can see that the US has also been pushing the homeland security perimeter. The Homeland Security Perimeter 1.0, as I called it, was marked by the declaration of President Obama and the Canadian Prime Minister on Beyond the Border, a shared vision for perimeter security and economic competitiveness. So it was focused on the North American continent. And then if you look at the Quadrennial Homeland Security Review 2014, I believe there you have the idea of the Homeland Security Perimeter 2.0. Focused on integrated, mutually supporting networks, basically across the nation and around the world, basically. So that's not practice yet, but that's included, I believe, in the vision that is driven the review. Then I have already spoken to that to some extent. The homeland, is it US or generic? And then homeland security, is it an American concept? Has it just been Americanized, or is it more generic? I would say so by today it has become a generic concept. However, QHSR 2014 more like nationalizes the concept again, right? Because it says, as the vision, Homeland Security vision is a homeland that is safe, secure, and resilient against terrorism and other hazards where American interests, aspirations, and way of life can thrive. So no value statement, is just something that we have to observe. And which makes a lot of sense, because the concept basically, grew out of this country in response to the 9/11 attacks. However, the Joint Chief of Staff, 1 year before QHSR 2014 was published, came up with a more generic definition of the homeland, where they said a homeland is a given physical region. So not necessarily CONUS. They just came up with a more generic definition, which from their perspective, when it comes to global force projection and things, makes a lot of sense, because there can also be other homelands, and then that has to be sorted out. And what does that mean for mission success? My favorite article is one of 1981 from Millennium, the Journal of International Studies, published by the London School of Economics and Political Science, where the concept of homeland was also defined more in social and geopolitical terms. Very, very interesting to read. So homeland security as a term existed before 9/11. We know that, right? There is at least one executive order by President Clinton that uses the term. And then the connection of homeland to security in the academic field has existed at least since 1981. It's just important to remember. Also, today, if we look at literature, we find that the term of homeland security is used beyond the US, or is used to cover policies, aspects, and countries beyond the US. And this is just an exemplary listing, so there's more out there, but this is just interesting to see how academics have used or come to apply the term of homeland security. In our program, we now have a course that focuses specific on the international and comparative perspective of homeland security across, I would say, different domains, right? How multinational cooperation or multi-state cooperation is organized, how counterterrorism is organized, how the fight against organized crime is aligned, how vulnerability analysis and critical infrastructure protection assessment and policies and manuals and guidelines are developed and applied across countries, different perspectives on use of armies in homeland security around the world, the private sector and homeland security in different countries, emergency management, and then also select paradigms for comparative homeland security. Interesting example, aviation security, TSA and everything, and from the US and also the European Union point of view, that's clearly like critical infrastructure, homeland security, very, very technical, and like doesn't have to do anything with broader considerations about societal justice, whatever. If you look at the Asia Pacific, you will see that aviation security is predominantly framed in terms of human security, based on what the United Nations Development Program in 1994 came up with, what human security was. So opportunity for growth, developmental perspectives, justice, freedom of movement, whatever. How it is a fact that the mission of Homeland Security in the US includes facilitating lawful trade and travel, so that's undebated. But in the Asia Pacific, this is more framed in a developmental perspectives and with relation to more global developmental goals, and then how aviation security not just helps keep risks at bay or enemies at bay and adversaries. Think of the adversary dynamics elicitation exercise, but how it can contribute for humanity to develop further and distribute resources in a more just way around the globe and things. Very interesting, different cultural setting, but very interesting to look at, because we need to work with allies and governments and groups of states from that region as well, who approach homeland security and transportation safety issues from a totally different, culturally and informed and value-based mindset. And that is important when we say that homeland security is about working across the nation and around the world, just as an example. This is my contact information that you probably already know. Just let me briefly point out the program website, where we now also have a resource listing that includes our Homeland Security research guide, other things, publications, conference proceedings, and things like that.